You've heard of matchmakers before, people that connect two strangers that may turn into a long-term relationship. But have you ever heard of a marketing matchmaker? Today on the Marketing Chief Podcast, I'm going to introduce you to one as we welcome Joe Koufman, the CEO and founder of Setup, an innovative company that connects brands with marketing agencies. Stay tuned to find out how it all comes together on this week's edition of the Marketing Chief Podcast. Welcome to the Marketing Chief Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Collins. If you'd like to watch this podcast and not just listen to it, head over to our website at marketingchiefpodcast.com and click on the episodes tab or search for us on YouTube. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Joe Koufman, who I can only say is one of the most influential marketers in Atlanta. I don't know how to describe his background because it's .com, it's digital, it's agency, it's entrepreneur. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Rob. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. You're like a Swiss Army knife of all things marketing, and you have so many tools in your toolkit, so to speak. Talk to us just a little bit about your foundation coming up through marketing. I want to spend a lot of time on your company because I think that's a really interesting concept. But give us a little bit of a background.
Yeah, well, I had a very classic marketing background. I mean, I was a politics and speech communications double major.
I did not know that.
At a small undergraduate university in North Carolina called Wake Forest. I really had no idea that marketing and business development would be my future. Mm-hmm. I remember graduating from college and I called the smartest guy I knew was my first cousin, Greg. And Greg is an undergraduate at Cornell University and then an MBA at Harvard. So this is a really smart guy. He also is fluent in 7 languages. And when I say fluent, I mean fluent, including Mandarin and Japanese and some tough langues. But so I called Greg.
They're all tough to me, my friend. They're all tough to me.
Even English is tough for me.
Yeah.
So I called Greg and I said, hey, Greg, what do you think I should do with my life? And Greg said, I think sales and marketing, marketing, you have the right temperament and personality and intellect. And I was like, that's great, Greg. What is marketing and sales? I had no idea. I really envy these students that come out of school with a marketing degree or with, even better digital marketing degree these days. Right. But, he sort of guided me into what that was. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. But I was working part-time at a retail store in the mall my senior year of college. And I went on a spring break trip to New Orleans to volunteer.
To volunteer. I'm not buying spring break in New Orleans to volunteer, but okay.
So continue. Senior year, it was, I think, 8 or 9 of us in a van. We drove it down to New Orleans. And we would volunteer by day. Yeah, I mean, we would volunteer by day and then go out having fun, eating and drinking and having fun at night. But while I was there, I said, I'm going to live here when I graduate, which I was graduating in 3 or 4 months. So this was not like a way down the road. So I graduated college and I said to my boss at the retail store in the mall, hey, I really want to move to New Orleans when I graduate. Any chance I could get an assistant manager job down there in New Orleans? And she said, yeah, let me make some phone calls. And so I was a manager in training. And then I went down to New Orleans and I was an assistant manager at the Abercrombie and Fitch in New Orleans. Okay. And I spent 2 years there and then was recruited by Eddie Bauer to do the same kind of job. And it turned out that they needed a store manager for their store in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Okay. So after 4 years in New Orleans, Eddie Bauer moved me to Jackson Hole and I proceeded to run the store there. And I did a radio show on Sunday nights for fun. It was the Big Easy Cabaret Show with Joe, all your favorite New Orleans and Louisiana music here on 96.9 KMTN, Jackson Hole, Wyoming. So I did that for about 1.5 years and I loved it in Jackson Hole, but I knew I didn't want to get stuck there out west because I was, from the East, grew up in North Carolina. And so eventually they said, hey, there's this really important gig running the Eddie Bauer in Lenox Square Mall in Atlanta, which is the largest mall in the Southeast. And it was the highest volume Eddie Bauer in the Southeast at the time. And so they moved me to Atlanta. And I did one holiday season there and just decided that I needed to get away from retail forever.
Sure.
So I went to work for a .com, because at the time, .coms were all the rage. We were going to all be millionaires within 6 months or something. And I ended up spending 8 years there, which is a really long time.
Yeah.
And, I dealt with the dot bomb, where all the .coms were sort of imploding, and you may remember pets.com and all of these.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But our company was called Knowledge Storm.
Okay.
And our biggest competitor was called Tech Target, and they went public and raised 130 million in their IPO.
Wow.
And then bought Knowledge Storm for $58 million. And, I had some stock options, which was really cool.
Yeah.
And I made a little money. The challenge is that the only money I made was enough to buy a laptop that, right now the laptops that you and I are talking on are 20 times more powerful than that laptop. But I did, I gained a lot of great experience, a lot of great relationships from those 8 years. And then I had, a couple of job offers, but I went to work for a really small digital shop in Atlanta called Spun Logic, that soon became part of a larger full service agency called Engage.
Right.
And we were about 250 people. And I spent 6 years there helping the agency grow. And we sold to Publicis Group, the massive holding company, in 2013. We were 42, 43 million in revenue when we sold. And I'd say a bulk of that revenue came from relationships that I had brought into the agency.
Okay.
So I worked for the acquiring company was Publicis Group, the holding company, but then we merged with Moxie, which was a pretty large agency here in Atlanta. And I spent 4 or 5 months at Moxie, and it just became clear that while it was a great agency, it just wasn't the same place that I had joined 6 years earlier.
Sure.
So I ended up making the decision to leave, and I had a lot of friends that wanted me to start an agency. But it became clear to me that I didn't really love the executional work. I didn't really want to build websites or create content or video or TV or radio or anything like that. I really loved the matchmaking. In fact, there were 3 couples that later married as a result of me connecting them with each other. So it always been in my, kind of a passion of mine and in my blood. And so I ended up starting what is now set up about 7.5 years ago in February of 2014.
So before we get into setup, because it's a phenomenal story and it's a really great business model from what I understand, and I want to hear more about that. But talk to me about the types of roles you were doing when you were at the .com, and then when you went to an agency. I mean, here's a guy who has a political science major and retail experience. Where did the transition to marketing come in?
Yeah, well, first the transition from retail to the .com, they were looking for people with interpersonal skills. Because they felt that it was easier to teach somebody with good interpersonal skills, technology, than it was to teach a geek how to have interpersonal skills.
With apologies to all of our geek audience.
I love geeks.
No, I do too.
Geeks are some of my favorite people, but the reality is, that they were looking for people with those interpersonal skills. And so my role there for the first 3 years was as an account manager. And so my job was really to help deliver on the promises that we were making to the clients, which were big software companies mostly. We were a software directory. Basically, software companies paid us to list in our directory.
Okay.
And then we generated leads for them when somebody would inquire about a company like Oracle or Computer Associates. They inquire about their piece of content, and we would capture that person as a lead and deliver it to the software company.
Sure.
But so after 3 years of business of account management, what I realized was that I really loved sales, and I thought I could be pretty good at it. And so I talked to my boss about, hey, could I make that transition to more of a business development and sales role?
Uh-huh.
And they said, sure. And so I ended up being really successful for the next 5 years doing that. And the reason I think I was so successful, a couple of reasons. One, because I'd spent the 3 years as an account manager, I really understood how the expectations I was setting with a potential client or a new client, how those would be delivered. And so I set really good quality expectations.
Yeah, because Secondly, it was your neck on the line if they weren't delivered.
Yeah.
And you feel that personal responsibility.
Yeah. And also because I was on the receiving end of having to deliver on those expectations, it made me more conscious of what we really could deliver and couldn't deliver reasonably. And then the other piece was I really felt I was always a challenger. There's a book, The Challenger Sale by Dixon and Adamson that I love. And I didn't read it until many years later. But the point of the book is that the challenger, rather than just looking for harmony in a relationship like a relationship builder, a challenger is looking for tension in the relationship. And they're sort of pushing the client, and they're sort of needling them a little bit and trying. And what I found was that clients were much more, they appreciated the fact that I'd thought about their business, that I was bringing them insights, and that I was pushing them and not just taking orders from them. So that was, you asked about what were the roles and what were the skills. I mean, to me, being a challenger and being genuinely curious about their businesses and sort of pushing the established norms that they were going about their day to day helped me be really successful in the role. And then, when I left there and went to work for a small agency, I had to have a whole nother education, because the transition from a product company where we were selling a number of leads to a software company to a services business, particularly an agency business, where we were, the question, instead of asking the question, how many do you want? We were asking the question, well, what are you trying to accomplish? How can we help you accomplish your marketing goals? And that challenger philosophy really helped, because it's still that curiosity and pushing the client was still very much in effect, but I had to learn a services business instead of a product-based business. And that transition was very rocky. I almost got fired, I should say, before
we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Yeah, I know a little bit of that story. Yeah.
Yeah. So and I almost got fired because I just didn't know how to do my job yet. And then once I really learned how to do my job, I really thrived and succeeded. But that curiosity, at my current company setup, we're very purpose-driven and values-focused. Our values are curious, honorable, resourceful, insightful, tenacious, and connected.
I like that.
Those were values that drove me before I even started the company, and they continue to drive us now as a company. But that curiosity and the tenacity are some of the values, for example, that I think make a really good marketer. So we can talk more about that too.
I love this kind of challenger aspect that you talk about. I think there are times when people on the biz dev side or the agency side challenge from a perspective of, I know your business better, you need to do this. But what I love about what you said is you've combined it with curiosity and asking questions and uncovering insights, so that you said it earlier, I knew their business, so then I then can challenge them. Now I have a bit of a platform to stand on to say, hey, I understand this, but what about this? Have you thought about this? I love that mix. Makes a huge difference on how the client would receive it, I would guess.
Yeah, and I think the old way of helping clients was solution selling, where you come in and you ask 25 questions. and you wait to hear the answers, and then you build a custom solution based on the answers that they give you to the questions. And the problem with that, and the reason why I think the challenger approach is sort of the next wave of philosophy or approach, is that first of all, we have this thing called the internet now, where we may be able to answer 15 of those 20 questions without even asking them, by just doing some research and digging, right? And then secondly, there's something really powerful about going to the client with insights, insights that are either gathered from experience, in the business, or that are gathered from research, under just learning and that curiosity we talked about. And I think that the clients really appreciate, you might be friends with your sales rep, but you may never buy anything from them, and they may never deliver any value, in terms of, if they're order takers, they certainly don't deliver value other than getting you the thing that you already know you want. But the idea of really pushing and challenging and being curious and being humble, you can't go in with the perspective that you know it all, or that you know better than they do about their business. I never presume that we know something better than the client does in their business, but maybe we bring some insight from another client that we work on, or another industry that we work on, or another project that we worked on in the past, or something like that. And to me, that's why one of the reasons that a client would hire an agency is to either fill a capacity issue where they don't have enough bodies to do the work that they need to get done, particularly as we are exiting the COVID, hopefully exiting the COVID phase of our lives. Marketing teams are leaner than they ever were, and it's harder to recruit great people than it was before. And so sometimes leaning on an agency to fill that capacity gap is one thing that we're seeing. And then the other piece is there's sometimes a capability gap where our team is really good at these 5 things or 10 things, but we're not good at this other thing, and we would lean on an agency to fill that gap.
And so many times clients are so concerned, and I can say this because I was one, right? About daily sales numbers, whether it's, tickets or turnstile accounts or whatever it is. Having an agency partner come in and say, hey, we've done this research. Here's the competitive set. Here's what's going on. It's not always so much rocket science as it is your internal team doesn't have time to think about it. Like you're just driving, and it's the next thing. And you are strapped for resources, so you can't spend the time needed to take a step back and think. And so having a partner like that is extremely helpful.
Yeah, I think to your point, marketers are often stuck in the weeds of the day-to-day, and it can be hard to zoom out, to think about larger strategy. And then there's also just, to your point, the executional piece where I might be focused on the big picture and the strategy, but how am I going to get it all done? I got a list of 25 things that I'm trying to accomplish, but I only have the resources in-house to do 5 of them. Right. So how do I get the other 20 done?
So let's transition into setup. We call Joe the Tinder of Atlanta.
No, more eHarmony or Match.com. Okay. Tinder is very transactional, and we're not transactional.
Okay, so we call Joe the matchmaker of Atlanta. Talk to us about how you came up with this idea, where you saw the hole in the marketplace, and really what you do now, and how it works for a client or for an agency.
Yeah. So at the very beginning, there were couple of things that were happening at the same time when I knew I wanted to leave the last agency that I worked for. One was I had a good friend who was a client at a big, actually a former employer of yours that has a big TV network, and there was a division focused on kids.
Sure.
And they said, hey. My friend said, hey, can you recommend a mobile agency to help us build mobile apps and mobile experiences for kids and their parents. And actually they had an agency in mind. They said, what do you think about that agency? And I said, that agency is a great agency, but mobile's not really their thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's some others that I might recommend instead. So that was happening at the same time. When I sort of announced I was leaving the last agency, I immediately had 6 job offers, and they were mostly from agencies that said, we want you to do what you did for Engage, but do it for us.
Mm-hmm.
And so those two things were spinning in my mind, was that there's multiple agencies that need help with business development. And there are multiple clients that just don't know where to turn to find the right agency support. And so those were the two things I was thinking about when I said, and I love matchmaking, because I already told you that, there are
Mm-hmm.
3 couples that married as a result of me connecting them. So I said, what if I work with multiple agencies that have different kinds of expertise or disciplines, and I focus on helping clients that are struggling to find the right agencies to fill those gaps that I just mentioned in capacity or capability.
Sure.
And originally the model was I only had one agency of each discipline. And if a client came to us and said, hey, I need help with social media, well, here's your social media agency. Or
Mm-hmm.
I need help with PR, here's your PR firm. What I found over time that caused me to shift a little bit in the model was that, there are two, when a client hires an agency, there are 2 parts of the decision. One part is this agency really capable of doing the work that I need them to do?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Are they capable? But the other side is there chemistry? Do I like them? Do I want to work with them?
So I'm so with you on that.
So I used to think it was 50-50 capability, chemistry. Now, I don't know. I think it's 35 or 40% capability and 60 or 65% chemistry. It's even, chemistry is even more important than capability in some aspects. So the shift for us in model was when we would work. Now what we do is we work with the client to help write a brief. Let's clearly define the problem. What are the issues that you're trying to solve that you feel maybe a marketing agency of some kind could help solve that problem?
Mm-hmm.
Once we've gotten agreement on the problem and the brief, then we can look across a portfolio of agencies that we've pre-vetted. We've already put through a pretty rigorous vetting process up front to see if any of them are a perfect fit to solve that exact problem. And if the answer is yes, particularly if it's an answer is yes for several of them, 2 or 3 of them or 4 of them, then we'll often make introductions to the client to 3 or 4 different agencies that all are capable. But the reason we do it is that we just don't know which one's going to click perfectly with that client. Right. So we're putting the control into the client's, court in terms of deciding which agency might be a good fit for them. Because you probably remember this when you were on the client side, Rob, that, often when you're seeking a new agency or agency support, it's like, let's ask around, ask the people in your team who you've worked with in the past, or ask a buddy that's at another company, who have you worked with, who's good. And the problem with that approach is that your universe is pretty limited, in terms of understanding all of the potential solutions. And you may not know about a great agency that just one of your colleagues never worked with. Mm-hmm. Also, agencies change a lot over time. I mean, it's a relatively fluid workforce, as you know from your current gig, that there's a lot of turnover at agencies. And so an agency that may have been great for you 3 or 4 years ago might not be so good for you now in this role.
Yeah, it's interesting. You hit on a couple of points which I fully embrace, and one would be the chemistry piece. I remember when I was VP of advertising at Paramount Theme Parks, and we had $20 million ad budget, and we were doing an agency search. And we asked the agency clients to not present creative. Well, actually, I said, you can at your own risk, because I didn't want to make a decision based on a creative piece. I wanted to make a decision based on how you think, what your strategy is, how you're going to approach the problem, chemistry of the team. And I can tell you I can tell you the name of the agency, I can tell you where they were. They presented an advertising concept that was spot on. It was amazing. I loved it. I could recite the whole spot to you right now, and that's been 20 years. Wow. It was so good. But the chemistry with the team was not there. It just wasn't there. And we ended up picking an agency that didn't present creative, but we liked their approach to business, and we liked creative they'd done for other people, right? Because you could hit or miss on a pitch. So I love that you think through that piece because it's so important. How is it different, though, than a lot of clients will hire an agency consultant who will do the search for them, and they'll go out? How is it different how you partner with agencies? What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, the short answer to your question is actually we do some agency, we call it custom agency search consulting. Okay. And I'll talk about the scenarios in which we'll do that versus what we call our in-network search, which is sort of our everyday thing. The short answer to your question is usually the need that the client has is to fill a gap. It's not usually a agency of record search where I'm looking for an agency to do everything for me, on a massive scale. And we found that those RFI, request for information, and then RFP, request for proposal processes are burdensome. It's like a full-time job on top of your day job.
So much.
And because of that, we found that it is often a better process to just write the brief and then evaluate a handful of agencies that have been well vetted and that already we know are a good fit. Sometimes that process doesn't result in, maybe you have no chemistry with any of the 3 or 4 agencies we send. And if that's the case, you can keep looking. There's no obligation. But we've found that a lot of times you can find a good fit within that group. Now, if you were looking for something bigger, we helped a retailer with a full, we call it, custom agency search. They were looking to replace their media planning and buying agency. Their budget is $25 million in media spend. They were working with like the 3rd or 4th largest media planning and buying agency in the world. And what they were realizing was, number one, this agency is not really as digitally focused as we would like.
And they're a small client in a big pond.
Yeah. I mean, they were working with this massive global agency, and they were spending $25 million in media, which sounds like a ton of money. But, when you compare it to the Coca-Colas or the Ford Motor Companies, or, the big, 25 million is a drop in the bucket. And so they might have been the 37th most important client for this agency in their roster, which meant that this agency was giving them the B or C team, and maybe the younger, less experienced staff that rather than the strategy people that really, would have given them the high level thinking that they were looking for. So they realized they wanted to hire a smaller agency where they could have more personal attention and get, more responsive client service, better strategic thinking, et cetera. They wanted to be a medium-sized fish in the pond instead of a tiny fish in a giant ocean for this big media planning and buying agency. So with this process, they hired us, the client paid us a fee to run the process for them. And so we started by interviewing all the key stakeholders to make sure we really understood what they needed and what they were looking for. And then we built a profile of the perfect agency. What are the must-haves for the agency to be the best fit for them? What are the nice-to-haves? And then we started building a list, and we started with, I think, 105 or 110 agencies. And we also knew in this case that they had some other must-haves, like they didn't want an agency on the West Coast because they didn't want to deal with time zone differences. So we looked at 105 or 110 agencies in Central and Eastern time zones, right? That looked like they fit the bill. They were focused on media planning and buying. We then looked to see, did they have any clients that sort of looked like this client, retail or similar target customer. And we narrowed it down to, I think, 25 or so. And then we issued RFI questions, request for information questions, to the 25. And when I say simple questions, there were like 5 questions, and they were questions that the agency could answer in an hour or less, not days, like literally,
right.
Tell me about what clients you have that are similar to this client. Tell me about, your approach for media planning and buying, and or how digital are you, something like that. So we asked these simple questions, and we narrowed it down to 12 or 11 or 12. And then we issued some RFP questions to the 12, which were much more extensive. We were asking the agencies to think a little bit about the client's business. And then we used those responses to narrow down to the top 4. The top 4 pitched the client, came to their office and did the whole dog and pony show. And, we at Setup sat through those pitches and helped them think, the CMO and the director of marketing, think through which one was the right fit for them. Now, we are paid by agencies to connect with potential clients. That's part of our model. Okay. So in order to not have any conflict of interest, we were extremely transparent with the client to say, here is a list of agencies that pay us. We can either exclude them from this process on purpose, just don't even include them, or maybe we can include a couple if we think they're a really good fit, and you decide. And the client ultimately said, we trust that you're going to be unbiased, and it's fine to include a couple. Now, of all the agencies we work with, I think 2 or 3 made that top 25. I think only 1 made the top 11 or 12, and 0 actually made the final 4. So, but it was good for them in that they were introduced to this client, and the client introduced to them, even though it didn't work out for this particular opportunity, who knows down the road. But also the process resulted in us helping them choose a really amazing agency that we had never heard of at Setup before the process began.
I love the transparency piece. As a client, I could be skeptical, very skeptical on those types of things. I love the transparency. And then you just kind of, at that point, are being a neutral, objective party, using your expertise on, I'm hearing you on, this is your business issue, and these are the agencies that can meet that. I love that. It's a great model, Joe. I really
thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and so, our process now, instead of in advance determining whether they need a custom agency search process or in-network search, we don't have to decide that up front. A lot of times what we do is we'll write the brief, we'll work with the client to write the brief. And if we look at the brief and say, you know what, we've got some agencies that are perfect for that exact thing, great, we'll make some introductions and get out of the way, right? And quick, easy process.
If we look at that, then at that point, you're not vetting the agency for the client because you've already done that. You're just making.
We did it up front,
is that right? Okay.
Right. We call it our agency assessment process, and we've already done it before the agency was even working with us. And that, that's where the agency pays us a monthly retainer to connect with potential clients. Sure. So it doesn't cost the client anything if they come to us. We write the brief and we determine we've got some agencies that are a great fit. We'll make the introductions, and that's that.
And then get out of the way. Okay.
Out of the way. If we write the brief and realize, crap, this is a bigger, deeper process than just us making a couple of introductions, then fine. The client can choose to hire us to do a full agency search where we consider a universe of agencies across the country usually. But it's been fun for us. We get giddy about the idea of helping the client find what it is they're looking for, and the matchmaking part of it is the exciting part for my team. So we do that in a lot of other ways beyond just agency client relationship. But the matchmaking part of our business, I mean, when we say set up we're marketing matchmakers. That's our tagline for a reason. That can mean a lot of different things.
We had much more to talk about with Joe, so join us next week as we continue the conversation and learn what makes a good client-agency relationship. And Joe shares a pivotal moment in his career when he almost got fired. Learn more about his company setup and how these marketing matchmakers connect brands with qualified marketing agencies by visiting setup.us. As you explore their website, click on the Resources tab and you'll find a treasure trove of free marketing documents for download. That's all found on setup.us. If you like what you hear on the Marketing Chief podcast, be sure to subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast app or YouTube and give us a rating on Apple Podcasts. Join us next week for part 2 of our conversation with Joe Koufman. We'll see you next time on the Marketing Chief podcast.